We have a very, very special guest today with us here on main campus in Building 43 at Google. This individual who's going to speak with us today is somebody who has revolutionized medicine and healthcare, both here in the US and abroad. With a 35-year career, and we'll hear very soon about the early part of his career where he really started on a very different track, a track that took him to a lot of new ideas that have brought us to a lot of revolutions across cardiac care, diabetes, and now Alzheimer's and other diseases as well. Our guest today has 6 books, all bestsellers on the New York Times bestsellers list. Our guest today graduated from the Baylor College of Medicine and then did his fellowship at Harvard and at Mass General. Please help me welcome Dr. Dean Ornish.
Thank you.
Dean, it really is a pleasure to have you here today. Here at Google, we're very, very concerned about looking at healthcare from many different points of view. You actually you were one of the former chairs of the Google Health Initiative back in 2007 to 2009.
With Adam Bosworth and Marissa Meyer.
Yeah, so you've had a lot of good involvement with Google over the years. Let's actually start at the beginning. You're in medical school. You're in the second year of medical school, and right off the bat, something is strange about you. What is strange about you, and what realization did you have, and what study did you conduct, even just as a medical student, right then and there, that led you down this new pathway?
I have to say, no one's ever asked me a question about how strange I was early on. I guess that would make me Dr. Strange. But,
yes, exactly.
I actually the beginning actually was even before that. It was when I was in college at Rice University in Houston, and I became suicidally depressed. And it's a long story, but I met a Swami named Swami Satchidananda, who when I was really ready to do myself in, because first I felt like I was an imposter, like I was stupid, and had somehow managed to fool people into thinking otherwise. And now that I was with a bunch of really smart people, kind of like maybe some people feel when they come to Google, I felt like it was just a matter of time before they figured out that they made a big mistake in letting me in. But I also had a spiritual vision that was really more than I could handle at the time, which is that nothing can bring lasting happiness. And so nothing external can bring lasting happiness. And so the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything, but even if I did, it wouldn't matter, was like, well, why don't I just kill myself, you know? Because people who are dead look like they're happy and peaceful. And I was all set to do that, but I got so sick, I'd run myself down so much with infectious mononucleosis that my parents realized I was a mess. I went home to Dallas, and as crazy as this sounds, as strange as it sounds, I wanted to get well enough and strong enough to kill myself. But in the meantime, my older sister, who had been a child of the 60s and who had studied with this ecumenical Swami, had really helped her. So my parents decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami. Now, in Dallas in 1972, this was pretty strange, as you would say. And he started off by saying a little lecture in our living room, nothing can bring you lasting happiness, which I'd already figured out, except I was ready to do myself in, and he was glowing. I said, like, what am I missing here? And he went on to say what probably sounds like a New Age cliche, but it turned my life around, which is that nothing can bring you lasting peace and happiness and health, but it's our nature to be happy and peaceful. And our whole culture teaches us that if we just get more stuff, more money, more power, more beauty, more accomplishment, then we'll be happy. And he would say, you know, once you set up that dynamic, that view of the world, however it turns out, you're generally going to be miserable, because until you get it, you feel bad. If someone else gets it and you don't, then you feel really bad. And it kind of confirms that we have this very hostile, zero-sum game, dog-eat-dog view of the world. But even if you get it, it's great for the moment. It's like, it's very seductive. I got it. I'm happy. But invariably, it's soon followed by, well, either now what? It's never enough. Or so what? Big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting sense of meaning. So then we say, well, this didn't, but maybe that will. And what patient years ago told me, he said, the letdown that comes from getting something that I thought would make me happy was so great, I always make sure I've got a dozen projects going at the same time so I can immediately shift my attention. So
you had this epiphany moment just in the college years.
Yes.
What led you to decide then to go to medical school?
Well, I always wanted to go to medical school. Actually, I was going to be a photographer. And there was a photographer named Philippe Halsman who did over 100 Life magazine covers in the heyday of Life. And I said, I want to be a photographer like you. He said, oh no, don't be a photographer. It's a terrible life. Be a doctor. You know? So then you can take all the pictures you want. You don't have to worry about pleasing an editor and so on. But I actually always wanted to be a doctor too. And so I went from not being able to read a headline on a newspaper when I was in college and tell you 5 minutes later what it said, to doing really well and graduating first in my class and giving the baccalaureate and all of that. And I say that just to say how powerful these beliefs are for better and for worse, and affecting our lives. So when I went to medical school, I was learning how to do bypass surgery with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon, who was one of the inventors of bypass surgery. And we'd cut people open, we'd bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured, and more often than not, they would go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. You know, eat junk food, smoke cigarettes, not manage stress, not exercise. And then their new bypasses would clog up, and we'd cut them open again, sometimes multiple times. So that for me became the metaphor, the kind of the paradigm or the guiding principle of all of my work for the next 40 years, which is that instead of literally or figuratively bypassing the problem, let's treat the cause. Sometimes when I lecture, I'll show a cartoon of doctors mopping up the floor around a sink that's overflowing and no one's turning off the faucet. And the idea is that what we're finding is the more diseases we study, the more underlying biological mechanisms we do research on, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better to the degree they make them at any age. It's an incredibly powerful and motivating and empowering message. So we were able to show for the first time that heart disease was reversible, that diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol, you know, when people get put on these drugs and they say, doctor, how long do I have to take these? What does the doctor usually say? Like, forever, right? It's like, how long do I have to mop up the floor? Like, well, why don't we turn off the faucet? So we can routinely reduce or get people off of these medications. We can reverse heart disease, diabetes. It turns out now that getting your blood sugar down, you know, half the population today is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Getting your blood sugar down with drugs doesn't really prevent all the horrible complications, you know, blindness and amputations and heart attacks and impotence and so on. But getting it down with lifestyle, you can prevent virtually all of them.
Right.
And the same is true for prostate cancer.
Back then in the 70s, when you first had some of these realizations, it was really almost heresy to say that you could stop, let alone reverse heart disease. And in a sense, would you say it was a naivete of somebody just fresh in medical school who maybe didn't know better, that gave you that impetus to say, hey, I'm going to try this and see if it works? Yes,
that was definitely a big part of it. And the other part was, having decided not to kill myself, I figured, okay, if I'm going to choose to live, I'm going to lead a really messy life. I need to know what's real and what's not. I need to find out for myself, because I didn't really trust anyone at that point. And that means I was going to make a lot of mistakes. And I said, I can live with making mistakes. In fact, later when I became a doctor, most people on their deathbeds don't regret what they did. They generally regret what they didn't do. Because if you do something and it fails, then you learn something really powerful. And there's a lot of wisdom that comes from making mistakes, as you know, and learning from them. But if you don't try, then you just don't know. So I figured, like, what's the worst that could happen? So I took a year off between my second and third years of medical school, much to my parents' dismay, and began this study. And you know, fools rush in. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I said, let's try it, and whatever it turns out, we'll learn something.
But one of your professors was supportive of it, right?
Oh yeah, they were very supportive. And that was the nice things about going to medical school in Texas, where they have this kind of pioneering ethos. Like, it's a crazy idea, but it's going to fail, but you learn something. Go for it. You know, we'll support it. You know, when I went to Harvard, it's so hierarchical there. You know, you have to wait till you're 40 and work in someone else's lab for 10 years before you even get a chance to do anything like that. And I remember, by the way, I mean, things have changed so much since then. The idea, even that the mind affected the body, was a crazy idea then.
So take us through the 4 pillars. Let's start with the heart program.
Okay.
And it's very similar for the other programs, but let's just start with the 4 pillars that you have now shown. And I want to talk about the data in a minute, because here at Google, obviously, we're very data focused. And what's I think very interesting about your program is it's not just, oh, people are feeling better. Clinically, as you measure their blood, as you measure their biomarkers through a course of a 12-week program doing these 4 pillars, you're actually seeing the biomarker data change over time. So
that's right.
Take us through the 4 different parts of how someone can go from having heart disease, worsening heart disease, and now stop it and then begin to reverse that clinically.
Yeah, they not only feel better, they are better in every way we can measure. And we're using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove the power of these very simple and low-tech and low-cost and often ancient interventions. So we started with heart disease, and we found that in just a month, the blood flow to the heart improved using specthallium scans. There was a 91% reduction in the frequency of angina or chest pain. Most people who couldn't, walk across the street without getting pain, or make love with their spouse, or play with their kids, or go back to work, within a week are pain-free. And it wasn't just a placebo response, because the heart was actually getting more blood in ways we could measure. We then did a randomized trial, and we found after just 2 to 3.5 weeks, the ability of the heart to pump blood improved using a test called radionuclide ventriculography. We then, after I had my medical training, we did the most definitive study using cardiac positron emission tomography, or PET, to measure blood flow to the heart. And we found a 400% improvement in blood flow compared to the randomized control group. and quantitative arteriography to measure the blockages in the arteries. And we found that they actually got less clogged after 1 year and even more improvement after 5 years.
And again, Dean, this is all without pharmaceutical or surgical intervention.
That's right. The program
So give us the four pillars of this program.
And it's been the same in all of these programs, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's basically a whole foods plant-based diet that's naturally low in fat and refined carbs or sugar. It's not low fat versus low sugar. It's really both.
Would you say it's on the diet side? Would you say it's close to the Mediterranean-oriented diet, or
It's
what?
like
How
that,
should people think about the diet?
It's fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products in their natural, unrefined forms. So that's the diet. The exercise is walking a half an hour a day or an hour 3 times a week. Various meditation and yoga techniques, which has been great at Google.
So the third is meditation yoga.
That's right.
You'll be happy to know we have meditation rooms
I know,
in
I
almost
love
every
that.
building. So yeah.
And that was one of the things we did back in the day when we were running Google Health. That and trying to make healthier food here, which was fun. And the fourth is what we call psychosocial support, which is really love and intimacy. Or if you reduce it down even further, it's eat well, move more, stress less, love more. That's it, boom, you know. And the more diseases we study and the more mechanisms we look at, the more we find that these same lifestyle changes have impacts, to the degree many people make them. We find reverse heart disease, diabetes, prostate cancer, change your gene expression, lengthen your telomeres.
Yeah, I want to get to genes in a second, but first I want to drill in. I think all of us would really understand that changing your diet, moving more, definitely would have an impact on the physiological self. But let's drill into the second two. Let's talk more about about how meditation, these kinds of mindfulness exercises really affect the physiological. And talk to us, I think there was a Canadian study called InterHealth. There's been other studies that you've cited and been part of and leading over the years, showing the physiological impact of something like meditation. Let's talk about meditation first, then let's move to the social impact of friend circles and things like that.
Yeah, well, meditation is a powerful way of bringing your mind to one focus. And when that happens, your fuse gets longer, for lack of a better way to put it. Some people say things like, I got a short fuse and I explode easily. Well, your fuse gets longer, things don't bother you as much. And when you're under stress, your body goes through the fight or flight response. So all of your arteries constrict, your blood pressure goes up, your eyes dilate. These are things that are designed to help you if the mythical saber-toothed tiger jumps out in front of you. You want your arteries to constrict and your blood to clot faster, for example, because if you get bitten, you don't bleed as quickly. But in modern time, we've evolved to deal with these intermittent stresses. So you're walking in the jungle, the tiger jumps out, either you run away from the tiger, you kill the tiger, it eats you, but one way or the other, it's over.
But it's done.
It's
not a continual,
Today, it's like, it's just chronic and relentless throughout the day. And so these same mechanisms that have evolved to protect us can harm us or even kill us, because it's not just the arteries in your arms and legs that can go into spasm or blood clots that can form there. It can form in your heart and cause a heart attack, or in your brain and cause a stroke. So anything that can manage stress better, virtually every illness has been found to, you're more likely to have it if you're under chronic stress. And the other side of that is the social factors. You know, that one of the real radical shifts in our culture in the last 50 years has been the breakdown of the social networks that used to give people a sense of connection and community. 50 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people that grew up together. They had a job that felt secure they'd been at for 10 years or more. They had a church or synagogue they went to. And today, most people don't have any of those, or maybe one. And we know that those things affect the quality of our lives, but they actually affect our survival, and to a much larger degree. I wrote a book, one of the books I wrote was called Love and Survival back in 1998, and it reviewed what were then hundreds and now literally thousands of studies showing that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from pretty much everything than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. So
I think one of the studies also that you cite looks at predictors based in high school and college years of prediction of health over a 40-year period.
That's
and
right.
It was the social bonds, actually, that were very much determining a lot of that health over many years.
That's right. They also did a study at Harvard Medical School. They gave one questionnaire to a group of Harvard students and said, to rate how close they were with their parents. 30 years later, only 15% of the people that were close to their parents had chronic diseases in midlife, and yet the majority of those who weren't did. Now you might say, well, how could one questionnaire do that? Well,
So note to the audience, everyone should call their parents after this. Okay.
So intimacy is healing. Anything that brings us together is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit to yoke, to unite, to bring together, union. These are really, again, old ideas. And so when we have that sense of love and connection and community, it not only improves the quality of our lives, it improves our survival. More than any other factor, more than smoking, more than anything. And it also interacts with those. People are more likely to abuse them. You know, we tend to say, like at Google, there's this you know, we are drowning in information, you know, which is awesome. I just love, because I can just pick out anything on anytime I need it in Google. But information is not enough for most people to change their behavior. I mean, if it were, nobody would smoke. It's not like you go, hey, Jack, I want you to quit smoking. It's really bad
the
for
rational
you.
argument itself does not seem to be sufficient.
Yeah, if I say, Jack, I want you to quit smoking, it's bad for you. Go like, I didn't know, I'll quit today. Like everybody knows it's bad for you. It's on every pack of cigarettes. But so then I ask them, why do you smoke? Why do you overeat? Why do you drink too much? Why do you abuse yourself? And I used to ask patients in our studies, because we got to know each other, I say, teach me something. Why do you do these things? They seem so maladaptive. And they'd say, you don't get it. They're not maladaptive. They're very adaptive, because they help us deal with our loneliness, our depression. They say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes, and they're always there for me, and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void, or alcohol or opioids numb the pain, or working all the time is a more socially acceptable way of numbing the pain, or video games, or whatever. So we've learned that it's not enough to give information. It's not enough to focus on the behavior. We need to deal with the deeper issue, the loneliness, the depression, the pain. And so we create support groups that are not really designed to help people stay on the diet. They're designed to create a safe environment to kind of recreate what people had 50 years ago, a safe environment. I mean, right now, you know, social networking was supposed to really bring us all together. You know, Facebook has, what, 1.6 billion people. But it actually has often a way of making you feel more lonely and more isolated, because most people don't, like if you grow up in a family with 2 or 3 generations, they know where you messed up, you know, and you know that they know, and they know you know that they know, and they're still there for you. And there's something really primal about that.
There was an analysis called Bowling Alone.
Bowling Alone,
remember, from
great
Putnam,
book.
which is all about how, you know, 50s and 60s, there were these bowling leagues, and people had their shirts, and they had their bowling ball, they had the initials. My dad has a bowling ball still with his initials on it, and he had a bowling league growing up.
See, that's why.
But now we're, quote, bowling alone, because we don't have those.
Yeah, or you look at someone's Facebook profile or their Facebook feed, and it looks like they have the perfect life, and it's like, why don't I? Or their bio sketch, they look great, you know, they don't talk about all the things they messed up. And so in our support groups, we just create an environment and say, look, let down your emotional defenses. Just talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in your life, without fear that someone's going to judge you or criticize you or give you glib advice. So somebody might say, you know, I may look like the perfect dad, but my kid's on whatever, some drug. And instead of someone else saying, oh, well, why don't you send them to a drug rehab program, like they hadn't thought of that, it's like, what feeling does that evoke in you? And share it as a feeling. Oh, I'm really sad to hear that. Or gosh, my kids have other problems. Or I used to have a drug problem, whatever. Suddenly, it doesn't fix the problem, but it fixes the loneliness and the shame and the isolation. It's the part of my program that most people have the most apprehension about. Most people think it's all diet, and it's not. But also, it's the part that's invariably the most meaningful.
Yeah.
I mean, we have people that, you know, were in our study 30 years ago, they're still meeting, you know, and they didn't even like each other when they first got together. They just happened to be going to the cath lab at the same time. Because that need for connection and community is a primal, fundamental human need. And even if you just scratch the surface of that, you can create a Facebook or a multi-billion-dollar company. So whatever people out here are doing in the world, to the degree that you can create real, authentic connections between people, it's going to be that much more successful and ultimately that much more healing.
So Dean, let's talk about genetics now. What's interesting is, again, you know, people often think of genetics as something hereditary. I have what my parents gave me, and that's what I'm kind of stuck with. But what you've shown is that these kinds of lifestyle changes, not only, again, the diet and the exercise, but the stress reduction with meditation, the bonds, are actually changing the expression of the genes. And so across 500 genes, both in terms of upregulating good ones and downregulating bad ones. We'll get to telomeres in a second, but let's just talk about those kind of studies that you've been involved with, where you've shown, again, you know, with actual sequencing to show that the genetic expression has changed with these kinds of changes.
Well, just that. I mean, you know, so often people say to me, oh, I've got bad genes, what can I do? In fact, you know, Bill Clinton is a good example. When his bypasses clogged up, one of his doctors had a press conference and said, oh, it's all in his genes, his diet and lifestyle had nothing to do with it. So I sent him a note and I said, actually it has everything to do with it. Not to blame, but to empower. Because if it's all in your genes, you're a victim. What can you do? You know, and I said, you're not a victim, you're one of the most powerful guys in the world. And so he began making these changes. He's still doing it now 9 years later, which I think sets a great example, whatever your politics, when a former president who was known for not eating particularly healthily does that. But we found that, again, it's another example of how dynamic these mechanisms are. In just 3 months, we found over 500 genes were changed. As you say, upregulating the healing genes and downregulating.
3 months of change in lifestyle.
501 genes.
500 genes.
And we published this with Craig Venter in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And we particularly downregulated chronic inflammation, genes that cause chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and what are called the RAS oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer, just like that. Again, it's amazing how dynamic people can get better or worse when they make these lifestyle changes.
Let's talk about telomeres now. Talk to us. You've been interacting with one of the founders of the whole telomeric medicine science, Liz Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize. Talk to us about what are telomeres, first of all, for those in the YouTube land who may not know yet, and what findings did you show in terms of the impact of these kind of changes on telomeres themselves? Well,
telomeres are like, there's the analogy that Liz Blackburn often gives is they're like plastic tips on the ends of your shoelace to keep your shoelace from unraveling. They kind of keep your DNA from unraveling. And as we get older, our telomeres tend to get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from heart disease, diabetes, most forms of cancer, Alzheimer's goes up proportionate to that. Now, she had done an amazing study with Alyssa Epple where they found that women who are under chronic emotional stress because they were caregivers of either parents with Alzheimer's or kids with autism, the more stress they felt and the longer they felt that way, the shorter their telomeres were. And they calculated that the difference between the high and low stress women was like 9 years in terms of, 17 years in terms of longevity. But what was even more interesting to me is that it wasn't an external cause. It was how the women were reacting to it that determined its effect on their telomeres. In other words, even if you're in a bad situation, you can mitigate and modulate that by doing the kinds of things we're talking about, meditating, by eating healthfully, by exercising, by having social support. And so I thought, well, gee, if bad things make your genes shorter, your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. So we did a study together, and we found that after just 3 months, the telomerase, which we published in the Lancet Oncology, increased by 30%. And after 5 years, the telomeres got 10% longer, whereas they got shorter in the control group. It's still the only control study showing that any intervention can actually make your telomeres longer. And when the Lancet sent out a press release, they called it reversing aging at a cellular level, which I think is true. And so many of these things that we think are in our genes, we really have a lot more control over. Again, not to blame, but to empower.
So let's talk about the medical establishment itself. You've had a deep engagement there. What's great is that you went through med school, you went to Harvard for fellowship, Mass General, and so you're deeply familiar with the core establishment. In fact, you've been invited now over the past number of years particularly to some of the key establishments to give rounds, to actually describe your science. So no longer is it something like, what is Dean doing over there? You're now inside the Cleveland Clinic, you're inside Mass General, you're inside these areas. Yet, if you look at the curriculum of med school, if you ask most doctors till today how they were trained and how they're being trained, we don't see enough of the kind of science that you're talking about. Again, not just feel-good stuff, but core science and impact.
Yes.
What will it take, or what do you recommend as a prescription, as it were, to the med schools, as you talk to deans of med schools around the country? What do we need to do?
Well, it's a really good question. I used to think if we just did good science, that would change medical practice and education. And to some degree it did, but not nearly as much as I thought. What I finally learned, and I learned this the hard way when I started a nonprofit institute called the Preventive Medicine Research Institute, and we've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country and doing research and so on. And so through that, in the early 90s, we trained 53 hospitals around the country. We got bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, and better adherence than anyone's ever shown. And a number of them closed down because we didn't have the reimbursement. So the painful lesson is, if it's not reimbursable, it's not sustainable.
So you went on a quest, an odyssey.
So I went on a quest.
And it took you what? Just a few months? Joke.
Yeah, right. It took 16 years, actually. Because I've been working with the Clintons since '93, and when he was president, I also was working with Newt Gingrich's daughter, who had some health issues. And so we had the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, 20 members of the Senate, 30 members of the House. They all said this is a great idea, and it still took 16 years to get Medicare to cover it. But they did, and I'm really grateful that they finally did. And
just to clarify that, so when people now want to do these lifestyle changes of the diet, the exercise, the stress reduction, and the bonding,
yes,
that program now is now covered, even though, again, a highly unusual situation, because typically most insurance companies want to cover a pharmaceutical intervention,
that's right,
a drug, a surgical intervention, but now they're going to cover they're covering something now that is not that.
That's what took 16 years, and they're covering it as a Dr. Dean Ornish program, which is great. So we partnered with a company called ShareCare, which is Jeff Arnold, who started WebMD, and Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, and Don Whaley and others. And we're training hospitals, physician groups, health systems, and clinics around the country. And again, we're getting, same thing, bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, better adherence. We're also doing these 12-day retreats where people can come from anywhere. And Medicare is paying for it, and most insurance companies are paying for it too. And so what I'm learning is that When you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. And it is changing. It's slower than I would like, but it's been 40 years I've been doing this work. But the president of the American College of Cardiology last year, Dr. Kim Williams, found that his own LDL cholesterol was really high, didn't want to go on statins the rest of his life, did a literature review, came across my work, went on my program. His LDL came down 50%, wrote about it in all the medical literature. And at the American College of...
the head of the American College of Cardiology himself.
That's right, that's right. And he did a 6-hour seminar on lifestyle medicine. Lifestyle medicine is using lifestyle to reverse disease and to treat it, not just to prevent it, which I think is the most exciting trend in medicine today. And we did a seminar on lifestyle medicine, and over 1,000 cardiologists came. That wouldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago. So things are changing, and it makes me really happy to see that.
So we talked about cardiology, we talked about diabetes. Let's talk about cancer. You've now shown, you did a series of studies on prostate cancer to begin with.
Yes.
And now I believe maybe on some other cancers, showing that, again, these kinds of non-pharmaceutical interventions did have a powerful effect, for example, in prostate. Talk about that study.
Well, prostate cancer is the #1 cancer in men other than skin cancer. And there was a major study that came out a year ago that looked at a 10-year study of randomized trial in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what they found is that men who had the conventional treatments, which are surgery or radiation, didn't live any longer than men who did nothing, who had biopsy-proven early-stage prostate cancer. And yet the complications of the treatments tend to maim guys in the most horrible and personal ways, like you're wearing diapers because you're incontinent, and you can't have sex because you're impotent in many cases, for no benefit at huge economic cost. So I partnered with, I did a collaborative study with Dr. Peter Carroll, who's the chair of urology at UCSF, and the late Dr. Bill Fair, who at the time was the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. When you're doing something disruptive, it's good to work with the most, respected people, because it's easier to get things published. People believe it. And we did a randomized trial, and we found that these same lifestyle changes could slow, stop, or reverse the progression of men who have early-stage prostate cancer. Just the lifestyle changes alone. So if a guy has a biopsy, their PSA goes up, gets a biopsy, the doctor will invariably say, you've got prostate cancer if they have it, and you need to have it taken out or you need to have radiation. But most guys don't want to do that, but they don't want to, quote, do nothing. The idea of watchful waiting, like waiting for something bad to happen. It's like sitting under a sword of Damocles, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Sure.
People don't want to do that. They say, I've got this cancer growing, I got to do something about it. So we give people a third alternative, an aggressive, if you want to put it in more macho terms, non-surgical, non-pharmacologic intervention. And then Dr. Carroll has developed these algorithms where they can monitor people very carefully and find out who is that 1 out of 50 people who really would benefit from surgery or radiation. And the others can do this. And unlike most things, the only side effects are good ones.
That's great. So what is next? You've done now cardiac, diabetes, cancer. Now you're thinking about Alzheimer's as well.
And by the way, before I forget, if it's true for prostate cancer, it'll almost certainly be true for breast cancer. And Dr. Laura Esterman, who runs the Buck Center on Breast Cancer Center at UCSF, and I've been talking about doing a study for a long time to show that. And I'm quite sure that'll be the case as well.
For breast cancer as
well?
For
breast cancer
Great.
As well. So what we did, we just began the first randomized trial to see if we can reverse Alzheimer's disease. People are more afraid of Alzheimer's than anything. In fact, James Watson, Watson and Crick, when he had his genome first sequence, he said, I want to know about everything except the ApoE4 gene, which is the one that increases your risk of Alzheimer's, because why would I want to know if I can't do anything about it? So we think you actually can do something about it. I think we're at the place with respect to Alzheimer's very much like we were 40 years ago when I first started doing research on heart disease. There's every reason to think it'll work. There are animal studies, epidemiological studies, anecdotal case reports, randomized trials where they use less intensive lifestyle interventions that could slow or stop the progression. I think a more intensive lifestyle intervention can actually reverse it. So we're doing a collaboration with Dr. Bruce Miller and Joel Kaplan at the Memory and Aging Center at UCSF, who run that. And we're going to take 100 men and women who have early to moderate Alzheimer's, randomize them into 2 groups, put half on the program and not the other, compare them using PET to look at amyloid and MRI to look at hippocampal volume and looking at cognitive function testing and biomarkers and so on. And we've raised most of the money that we need to do this. So we've already started it. We just got our IRB approval last week and we're ready to begin. And I'm cautiously optimistic. You never know, but I'm pretty sure this is going to work. And it runs in my family too, so I have a personal interest in this. And if we could show that we can reverse the progression of early to moderate Alzheimer's by changing lifestyle, that would really give millions of people new hope and new choices. Because, when you lose your memories, you lose everything.
Yeah. Particularly as in society, our demographics getting older,
That's right, with
people
the
will
aging
age and,
exactly.
And live longer, this is going to be more prevalent. So before we turn to audience questions, let me just ask kind of a very practical question for folks here and also watching on YouTube. In terms of the kinds of things that people should do in addition to the diet, the lifestyle, meditation, stress reduction, and the social bonding, are there certain kinds of, in terms of the diet that we get, the nutrition we get, I want to use the word nutrition maybe even better than diet. People sometimes confuse diet for a diet, like
Yes.
some kind of bizarre regimen. But the kind of supplements that people should think about using or not think about using, fish oil supplements, good or bad, mushrooms, what are, I don't mean shrooms, I mean mushrooms. What are
Actually,
the
there's
kinds
some
of
good
things,
studies on shrooms as well.
What
That's
are the
interesting.
kinds of things that people should or should not consider?
Before I answer that, let me say one thing that I forgot to mention, which is that with all this interest in personalized medicine, it's the same lifestyle program that we found could do all of these things. It could downregulate all these mechanisms, that could reverse all these different conditions. And I think it's because they share certain common underlying biological pathways. Although we tend to silo them as being different diseases, they really may be more different manifestations of the same kind of underlying processes. Now, if you're trying to do a targeted, immunotherapy for melanoma, like you so brilliantly, I mean, I don't know if you know Jack's dad. Is it okay to talk about you
Sure.
and your dad? Jack's dad developed melanoma. Now, when most people, when their dad develops melanoma, they go, "Oh, that's so bad. I'm so scared." Jack, who's not an oncologist, decided he would learn everything he could about melanoma, developed a treatment and immunotherapy, and his dad is cured. So that's Jack.
I didn't develop myself. We supported other people's work.
Yeah,
Yes.
but you were the one who actually directed that. It wasn't just giving them money. It was actually saying, let's study this. Let's see what happens. It was really your work that they put into practice. So if you're doing something like that, I think a targeted immunotherapy or whatever is brilliant. But for the vast majority of chronic diseases, it's these same lifestyle changes that can prevent and reverse them. And it's not all or nothing. I wrote a book called The Spectrum, which was based on the finding that in all of our studies, the more you change, the more you improve in every way we can measure. So if you have a life-threatening illness, that's more the pound of cure. You really do have to make big changes. That's why we were the first to prove that, because most people didn't go far enough. But if you're otherwise healthy, if you indulge yourself one day, eat healthier the next. If you don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. You get the idea. In terms of supplements, the ones that I take fish oil every day. I think this, in general, it's better to get your nutrients from food, but I think omega-3s may be an exception to that if you're going to eat fish.
I guess that's my question. In other words, it's obviously better to get it from food, but in the kind of what is available to us in the average, even organic kind of grocery, what do you feel is missing from that general availability that we may want to think about supplementing?
I think the omega-3s in fish oil are really worth doing because there are no clean fish. All fish are contaminated with either mercury, dioxin, PCBs, bad stuff, in varying degrees. But when you take the fish oil, if you take certain brands, they remove all the bad stuff. So you just have the pure thorium. Or you can take the plankton-based omega-3s, which are vegan, which is really where the fish get it from anyway, from eating the plankton. And then you don't get the bad stuff either. So I think 3 grams of fish oil or flaxseed oil or a plankton-based omega-3s a day are really a good idea. I think that depending on, I think that the probiotics, actually, there's a lot of, we're actually also doing some studies on the microbiome.
The microbiome. Let's talk about the microbiome a second. Just describe that.
There are trillions of cells in our body that we exist in a homeostasis with. And we're just realizing how powerful those are. And again, how dynamic you can change your microbiome. We did a pilot study. We found in just 3 days we could show significant changes in the microbiome in healing directions. So I think for most people, if you're not eating a particularly healthy diet, taking one of the microbiome supplements can be a good thing. The omega-3s we've talked about. I think most people, don't get enough vitamin C in their diet, so taking, 500 or 1,000 milligrams of that is a good idea. The turmeric, I know you like to drink turmeric tea, which we share at Samovar.
Right here. There it is.
Turmeric is a very powerful anti-inflammatory. This is one of the reasons why it's been linked with reducing Alzheimer's, but also other conditions. Most people aren't going to drink enough turmeric tea or eat in their diet or curcumin, so I take a supplement. It doesn't make you smell like curry, and those are good. So those are the things that I think most people could benefit from.
Cool. Well, let's turn to the audience. If there are questions from the audience, why don't we start? You have a question? Yeah, let's use the microphone, make sure the microphone's on, and so that our YouTube audience can hear.
Yeah, I guess it's on.
Yes, good. Tell us your name and what your question is.
Yes.
Let's keep our questions short. We want to get a lot of questions in. Go ahead.
My name is Dipankar, and thanks for coming and giving us this excellent talk.
Thank you.
My question is about, my dad, I'm an Indian, and my dad lives in India, and he's having a heart disease. So my question is, how are your diets mapping to Indian kind of food, because food, as you said, is a major part of the plan. But
Yes.
if the food is, so Indian food is typically pretty oily, and but if we move him to a different kind of diet, then he will not like it and he'll probably reject it.
Yes.
So how is that going?
There are a
Thank
couple of doctors in India
Thank
that are offering my program there. And it's working really well. They have thousands and thousands of people who have gone through it. But you're right, the traditional Indian diet, even if it's vegetarian, is generally high in fat, with all the oils and so on, and also generally high in like ghee and butter and things like that, and saturated fat and so on. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And for whatever reason, people of Indian descent are usually more predisposed, particularly to type 2 diabetes and often to heart disease. So these lifestyle changes are even more important. And unfortunately, what's happening in India is happening in China, is happening in most of the developing world, is that they're starting to eat like us and live like us and all too often die like us. And 50 or 60 years ago, heart disease and diabetes were really pretty rare in India and in China. And now they're by far the #1 causes of death. So, and it's diverting a lot of precious resources from things that really do require drugs, like AIDS, TB, and malaria, to things that can be largely prevented or even reversed by changing lifestyle. So copy our successes, but not our mistakes.
Thank you. Other questions, please.
So I have two questions.
Your
So is
name, and then questions.
My name is Gurmeet. Two questions. So is there some effort to develop recipe books for, let's say, different parts of the world? So I suppose we need like 20 different recipe books for different parts of India.
Can you take it just a little slower?
Sure. So are there some efforts to develop recipe books for the different parts of the
Recipe books?
world?
Yeah.
For customized to the spices and ingredients found in different parts of India, for example. And the second question is, so do you have books or something for teenage kids? So what are we doing about teenage kids in USA?
Teenage kids, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we don't have anything that's specific to India for spices, but I'd love it if you or someone like that could.
You have some recipe
develop.
books, but I don't think
Oh, we
they're
have
specific.
tons of, there are hundreds of recipes in all of my books, but nothing specific to Indian food.
So maybe a new
But-
collaboration.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think,
so.
yeah.
That'd be great if you
And
could
about
do
teenage, how about teenage?
that. I've got a 17-year-old son, and he was vegetarian until he hit about 14 or 15. He said, "Look, Dad, it's either meat or heroin. What do you think?" So I said, "Meat. Good choice." He had to rebel in some way. But when he was younger, I learned that, even more than being healthy, whether you're 6 or 60, people want to feel free and in control. And he's a pretty strong-willed kid, and Jack has been mentoring him, which we're very grateful for. And I knew that if I told him he couldn't, have certain foods, he'd want them, and he'd probably develop an eating disorder. So I said, "Look, the rule in our family is nobody can tell you what to eat, not even me, and I'm your dad, and I know more about food than a lot of people because it's your body, you control it. This is why we eat what we eat, but you decide what you want to have." And so we taught him how to read labels, so he'd go into a store and say, "Oh, that has too much of this," or "I don't think I should have that," Now that all shifted when he went through puberty, but I think that the idea of empowering your kids and teaching them, and if you can help them grow food and actually see where it comes from, or visit a farm if you don't want to do it yourself, it's magic to them. And they get their taste when they're younger, their taste preferences, which are really malleable. So if you tend to feed them healthy food from the beginning, they begin to actually prefer those kinds of foods. So I haven't written a book yet like that, but I'd like to. But
Yeah, I think
Bill Sears has written some good books about that.
Bill Sears?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so challenging because, particularly here in the U.S., there's so much packaged food.
Yes.
And even, quote, healthy packaged food, it does make it easier for a very busy parent. You're a busy parent, you have lots of, kids or feed, things like that, and you just get a lot of packaged food. But it is disconnecting us from the source of the food and
It's true.
where things are from.
It's
So
true.
it's something that, unfortunately, is a major challenge that.
Well, to the extent at least the meal kits or whatever can be used to, the meal kits are different than the frozen foods and so on, because you're actually making dinner, but they've just kind of done the hard part, so it makes it easier. And there's studies that show that just when the family sits down together to have a meal together, just the sitting down together, there's better academic performance, lower truancy, lower illness, all the kinds of things that you want. Again, it goes back to the social factors and the power of community and family.
Great. Other questions, please. Your name?
Hi, my name is Megha. My question is about what are the things we can adopt and encourage that can help build a stronger immunity against
Stronger
diseases?
immunity, yeah.
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is to actually have more love in your life, believe it or not. There was a study that was done by Sheldon Cohen that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And I don't know how he got this through the Institutional Review Board, but he got volunteers and he dripped rhinovirus, that causes colds, in their noses. 100% of them got infected, but not everybody that got infected actually got sick. And they found that the more social contacts they had, the more friends visiting them, the more phone calls, the more love that they had, they had 4 times fewer signs and symptoms of a cold, even though they were all infected. So through Koch's postulates, we have this idea that the bacteria or the germ causes the disease, but it's a necessary but not usually always sufficient factor. Even with people who are, Margaret Chesney did a study at UCSF where she found that men and women who were HIV positive, who were lonely and depressed, were more than twice as likely to develop AIDS and die from it than those who weren't. So, diet's important, exercise is important. These all affect our immunity. But probably more than anything, these social factors. And, we tend to think that the time we spend with our friends and family is a luxury that we do after we've done the important stuff. And to me, the value of the science is that it increases awareness. So we understand just how powerful those things are, and that the time we spend with our friends and family is not the stuff we do after we've done the important stuff, that it is the important stuff.
And that's also a message for employers. I mean, obviously here we put a lot of emphasis on that. People are encouraged to take their vacations, go home, be with their families, things like that. So it's a real message around if you want your employees to be healthy.
Yes.
It's just not a nice to have. It's a must have.
Well, and unfortunately, the startup tech world is often the mythical let's stay up all night and eat pizzas and really run ourselves into the ground. And yet, that you can do that for a short time. But if you really want to keep your creativity at its maximum, as you know, taking care of yourself makes you smarter and makes you work more effectively.
Great. Other questions? Please, right here in the front, and then oh, good. There and then the front. We have 2 mics. Okay. There. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Saurabh, and my question is regarding caffeine. There's a lot of confusion regarding whether it's good or if so, how much.
Yes.
Would love to hear your thoughts.
Why do you
Thanks.
want to know? That's what I'm like when I have too much caffeine. I'm very caffeine sensitive. If I even have decaf, it's like hurry up! Can't you go any faster? It makes me very aggressive. I've learned to avoid caffeine in all of its forms. But my wife can drink 3 cups of coffee and go to bed. So there is a lot of individual variation around that. The problem with caffeine is that for some people like me, it makes your fuse shorter. It can potentiate stress. It makes you more likely to be stressed out. For other people, it doesn't do that. And there are other things that are in the coffee besides caffeine, the polyphenols and so on, that are actually maybe protective against some of the more common chronic diseases. So you decide. If you find that you don't have those negative side effects from eating caffeine, then net it's probably good for you, up to a point.
This is right in front here, and then we'll go to the back.
I'm like Robin Williams on Speed if I have caffeine.
So thanks for the really interesting talk. I'm Micra.
Is the mic on? Let's make sure it's on.
Oh, sorry.
Good.
I'm Maithra, and so my question is on, so a lot of the improvements you described, they're sort of these very human lifestyle improvements. So I was curious about whether there's any sort of technology that's sort of emerging that you're excited about that might also sort of affect these improvements in people's lives.
Yes, I think it's a good question. Yes, technology is a powerful force. I don't have to say that here at Google. But it can be used to bring us closer together. It can isolate us more, as we talked about earlier. If you look at other people's Facebook profile, it makes you separate. But on the other hand, we found that support groups are so powerful, and after they finish their Medicare and most insurance companies are paying for 72 hours of people meet twice a week for 9 weeks, or a 12-day immersion retreat. And afterwards, we found that because they've developed the sense of trust already, and trust is really everything, because you can only be intimate to the degree you can open your heart and be vulnerable, and you can only do that to the degree you feel trusting. And so that's why trust is really fundamental to healing. And so once you've developed that sense of trust with a group of people, we then meet, instead of having them come in a central place, which we found was hard, particularly if they came into a retreat from different parts of the country, they can all we use Zoom as a technology, but we could use Google or anything, to say, okay, they pick a day, like Thursdays from 5 to 6, we're gonna have our support group. It's 15 people, and they all chime in. I like Zoom because whoever's talking immediately fills the screen, and so for people who are not very tech savvy, it's an easy way to do that. And so that's just one example of how technology can really be healing in a powerful way.
Sorry, one really quick follow-up question. What
Sure.
about machine learning? So this is something I work on, so I was just curious as to...
Artificial intelligence, machine learning.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the man here. He's having a conference here for the next 3 days on that. What particular aspect of that are you asking about?
So one thing people are excited about in machine learning, at least in sort of health applications, is trying to take image data and sort of try and spot sort of the progression of diseases, for example.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, certainly, we're already seeing things like in pathology that artificial intelligence can actually diagnose cancers, more accurately and sooner than even the most experienced radiologists. But I defer that question to you, Jack.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's a very exciting field. I think we're just at the beginning. If you look at medical imaging as an example, and there's several projects across this campus and other startups and lots of people beginning down this road. The good news is I started my career in medical imaging at NIH, and it's one of the fields that it's been most digitized. So the good news is coming out of the scanner, out of the most major scanners, Philips, GE, so on and so forth, Siemens, you get a digital file. Unfortunately, most of those files get stored away in some data center and no one ever looks at them again. We're beginning now as a technology community to begin to tap into that and then hook that up with the electronic medical records, which again can be our ground truth as to what did in fact happen to this person. What were they diagnosed as based on the medical imaging, and then what was the ground truth over the next 5-6 years of what actually developed. And that becomes a rich source of supervised learning possibility for neural networks or other models that we can use. So I do expect this kind of technology to really enhance the role, say, for example, the radiologist, where the radiologist now is not just like popping something up on a screen. And I still visit hospitals today where people are printing out films, and so it's still happening today. Where rather than looking at it on a high-resolution monitor,
Yes.
they're still printing out film. So that is changing. There are other parts. There's still a lot of records that are not electronic yet. There is a lot of movement to make that happen. And even when they are electronic, we have to be very, very careful. It's clear now that we have to be, as we're ingesting this data for the role of supervised learning, there's often errors in terms of the labeling, and we have to be careful about what we're training, what we're not training. We also want to make sure that we have a diversity in terms of the demographics that we're ingesting into these AIs. And so if we're going to do this, we want to make sure that we have population pools that are drawn from a wide gamut of society so that we haven't inadvertently trained the AI to do a great job on this part of the demographic when their medical image is taken in, but not that part of the demographic. And I also think it's important to do this on a global scale. There are some initiatives in other countries to begin to add to this database, but it's really just beginning. So my biggest concern right now is about diversity, is about making sure that as we're going through this, we have a real wide diversity of patients that are coming into this thing. But
And let me say one more thing. There's a company called LARC that Julia Hu organized with a group of MIT people that actually does AI text-based messaging. So it feels like there's a health coach on the other end, but there's not. And actually you can scale that for virtually nothing because you don't have to have a coach on the other end. And so it's actually getting increasingly effective at motivating people to make behavioral changes that can be scaled at virtually no cost.
Yeah. The one real-world example I would also point people to in the UK is something called Babylon Health. People in the audience and on viewing this can check out that company. That company has not just created a fun app which you can use to engage on your health issues and also triage. The National Health Service of England, of the UK, uses it to actually officially triage 1.5 million citizens in the UK.
Yeah.
And so it's actually an official part.
Yeah,
and
it's
so it's one of the
beautiful.
first examples, Dean, I've seen of a health service incorporating this technology
Yes.
in an official capacity.
Yep. And by the way, and ShareCare is using the AI in their app as well. So I think we're seeing this more and more, and I think it's really the wave of the future.
Yeah. I think we had a question back here. Yeah, please, your name and go ahead.
Hi, my name is Priya. I'm interested to know that most people coming from India suffer from vitamin D deficiency. And so we've been prescribed by the doctors to take it as a supplement. What are the precautions actually needed to mix it along? And there are some articles that I read online that you shouldn't take it with this supplement. You shouldn't take calcium supplements along with iron. There's so many confusing things about taking supplements. Can you clarify it?
Well, it's not just people from India. Most people in this country are vitamin D deficient, vitamin D3 deficient. And so I think that I would add that to my list of supplements for most people is, take 1,000 units of vitamin D every day. And I wouldn't worry so much. Vitamin D is a pretty innocuous thing about combining that with other supplements. I'm not aware that that's really going to create any major problems for most people.
Cool. Question here in the front. We have a great.
Hi, this is Alexis Crow. Thank you so much, Dean. I have a question around sleep. We haven't touched on that. And I think all of us would agree that it's increasingly important, and it's in fact one of the most important. So what are your thoughts?
Well, sleep is one of the ways that your brain detoxifies itself. And so there are a lot of people who think, I don't need much sleep and so on. But, You know, Bill Clinton famously said that the worst decisions he ever made were when he was sleep deprived. And I think, and Ariana Huffington's done a lot of work in raising the awareness about the importance of that. So I think if you want to really be creative and innovative as opposed to imitative, try to get more sleep. It can really make a big difference.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about sleep also is that we don't fully know the science yet of how sleep is helping us. And so I think a lot of times we're willing to cut corners on sleep because we don't have that immediate knowledge about what exactly is happening in the brain during the sleep. But obviously it's now come out and it's very clear from many studies.
Well, I think even from an evolutionary standpoint, like why would we evolve to do something that's going to make us like use up so much of our life, make us completely vulnerable to predators while we're sleeping, unless it was really important. And I think that's, you know, part of why when I'm in the middle of the night and wanting to get up and do work, I have to remind myself these things.
Exactly, great. We have one more question back here.
Hi, my name is Naman. My question is about like the prescription, the 4 pillars which you mentioned. Does that change based on the ethnicity or the underlying problem which a person is trying to treat, like obesity or heart disease or cancer or this thing, or is it all?
Not really so much. I mean, we fine-tune a little bit. You know, some people can metabolize refined carbohydrates or gluten or things like that better than others. But for the vast majority of it, it's really the same. And when I started doing this work, I predicted, incorrectly as it turned out, that the younger people who had less severe disease would do better. And what we found, it wasn't a function of age or disease severity. It was simply a function of the more you change your diet and lifestyle in these areas, the more you improve in every metric we looked at and every disease we studied. Now, there may be ways of fine-tuning this as we learn more, but what I'm still so struck by is that these same lifestyle changes, the more diseases we study and the more biological mechanisms we research, the more reasons we have to explain why they're so powerful. And it's so hard for a lot of people to believe, even like, you mean talking about my feelings can help me live longer? Are you kidding me? You know, is that the best you can do? It's like, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. I mean, David Spiegel did a landmark study at Stanford years ago where he took women with metastatic breast cancer, randomized them into 2 groups. Both groups were getting the same chemo and radiation and surgery, but one group had a support group once a week for an hour and a half for a year in the same ways we were talking about, and then they stopped. 5 years later, he's told me he almost fell off his chair when he looked at the data. Those women lived twice as long. You know, so these simple things can really make a powerful difference.
Great. With that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our YouTube audience. Thank you, Dean Ornish.
Thank you.
Let me just mention that if folks want more information, I believe your website is ornish.com.
Yep.
Your nonprofit is pmri.org.
Yep.
And the general website is ornish.com for people to get more info.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you.